All right, crew, break out. We need lighting from the
Lights,
left.
camera, action. What's up, fuckers, and welcome to season 6, episode 20 of Dualistic Unity. I am feeling just in awe and appreciative of all of the ups and downs and all of the shades of gray that I get to experience, even though sometimes I just want to feel black or I want to feel white. And I'm okay with all of it. And that's all I have to say.
Oh my goodness. I'm excited for you to see this episode talking about how there is a potential that only exists in not getting what you want, and how when you make the most of that potential, it leads you in directions you never could have imagined because it does not meet any of your expectations. And so jump in, and I'm excited to hear what you guys think of this episode.
Enjoy.
Ow, ow. Oh my goodness, Jackie, we are here and I am so excited. It has been an interesting couple of days, and I'm really glad that they all led to being here with you.
Likewise, Amanda. Yeah, we haven't recorded an episode in over a week, so lots of stuff to chat about. We actually just, well, I guess technically we did a live episode like right before this, but not our official episode. So, the live was our warm up, and now we are on a good one. We have a little flow going. We're feeling goofy today, and our conversation so far has centered around just being fluid with life. And, like when inevitably you don't get what you want, being able to pivot and not lose hope, because you know that the way things are working out, it's not that that's how they should be working out, but that's how they are working out. And living in reality rather than living in this mental imaginary world where you know everyone's looking out for you and you should get everything you want. It's a lot easier just to live with your feet on the ground and recognize that there's opportunity in literally every situation, and you're never trapped, even though you might have an intense emotion or you're going through a really difficult time. It's working itself out and nothing is too big for you to face. So that's where our conversation has sort of circled around this morning. And yeah, I'm feeling good. It literally doesn't matter. It's not that I have a reason to feel good or just content with my life. I can be like this mofo in a burning room and it feels like everything is crumbling around, and my hopes and dreams are getting thrown on the floor. I'm not saying this is the situation I'm currently in, but no matter what, I can have this inner sense of ease and just the acceptance that, yeah, this might not be pleasant, but it's fine and I'll get through it. And you never have to make shit worse than it already is, because it's already gonna suck. Like, that's just the fact of the matter.
Oh my goodness, yes. I was having a blast with you in our live and just chatting about exactly this, just how much not getting what you want isn't the end of the world, even though it can definitely feel that way. And it certainly feels that way when you tell yourself it's that way. But even if it is unpleasant, it's still fine. You can still do something with what is unpleasant, because that can lead to more space and that can lead to other opportunities that feel more pleasant. But when you're griping and throwing a tantrum because you're not getting what you want, you're only adding more wood to the fire. You're only fueling the fire that feels like it's consuming you, but the fire wouldn't get bigger if you wouldn't keep adding to it. And eventually all fires burn out. There's no fire that burns eternally, you know. The only fires that burn eternally are in hell, and thank goodness that doesn't exist in the way that we think, you know. It's just that we can live in a personal hell that is customized to us, you know. And that was definitely a realization that I had just over the last couple of years, just how much I really can create a hell just for one. And it, because it, there are moments that feel absolutely hellish. And and since then, you know, I haven't experienced too many more moments like that, because I just feel my feelings without thinking that there's something wrong, you know. I definitely had a meltdown yesterday because I didn't get something that I wanted. And today I'm laughing about that meltdown. Now that's like a cherished memory, that meltdown, because it just was, I was just literally throwing a tantrum. And I was letting myself feel those feelings, but then it was like it didn't take long for me to go to like throwing the tantrum to just laughing because I saw myself throwing the tantrum, and I'm like, oh, that's hilarious. You know, like it's not that serious, Amanda, you know. Relax.
Oh God, yeah. And that's the best we can do, right? And this is definitely overly simplified, but it's kind of like you could either laugh or cry. It's kind of a choice, whether you want to take shit so seriously that it like overwhelms you and makes you cry and be like, oh, what was me? Like that shit shouldn't have happened that way. Or you can laugh and be like, well, what the fuck was I thinking? Like, oh my God, I played myself yet again. You rip off the mask of the villain in Scooby-Doo and it's always you. Right? So that's funny what from a certain perspective. Um and
You
like
kid.
yeah, but like what would you rather do? Do you want to spend your whole life every single time that something disappoints you crying over it and like throwing a tantrum and being all down in the dumps and keeping yourself there and only letting yourself be happy when you get what you want? Like that's fully within your influence to, just make that little shift between whether you want to hold on to what you want, even though it's already gone, or flow with what's already going, because no matter what, you're in the situation you're in, and your opinion of it doesn't matter. Your opinion of it doesn't automatically change it. So you can have just like a baseline acceptance for what is like, whatever happens, happens. And you might have ideas about that, but those ideas aren't objective by any means. And there's no situation that you shouldn't be going through. Like every experience is just as valid and just as valuable. It's not even about just getting through the hard times more easier to get so that you can get to like a better feeling more quickly. It's not about getting rid of it. It's just like not separating your life into good moments and bad moments and only appreciating the good ones. Because that's like half your life that you're just sort of like not appreciating at all, or you're making a lot worse for yourself. Like that psychological suffering is fully contingent on what we're attaching to and the perspective that we're taking at any given moment. So, like, once you realize that, it doesn't make sense to prolong your suffering. It really doesn't. But you can, and it's funny when you realize you're doing it because sometimes it's habitual, and then you realize, and then you're like, wow, I was really making that hard on myself, but that's funny. And so I can turn that into like a good situation now. Like you with your soup. Like I'm sure like you were sad and you just I would have really wanted that soup too if I was in your situation. And that probably would have made you happy. But would it have made you as happy as having this story to tell and look back on and laugh at yourself? Like they're still equally kind of, you can't say one outcome would have been better than the other. It's all it's all valid. And that also can influence how we look at our past as well. Like there are so many things in my past that I have regretted, or I'm like, oh, that was definitely the wrong choice. Or I look back at certain, I don't know, like relationships I was in or like behaviors that I used to do, and I'll look back and sort of cringe, be like, oh, that wasn't how that was supposed to go. And as long as I'm judging it, I can't see it. I can't see the value in it because I'm not allowing it to fully, like, I'm not taking ownership of that experience, or like, I'm not fully accepting that it happened if I'm living in this state of like self-judgment, because that's how we create like distance between our idea of ourselves and the parts of ourselves we don't want to be associated with. Like, as long as I'm judging myself for doing it, I don't really have to fully take accountability for it. And it takes like taking that accountability to really learn from an experience. Like, for example, there was a time in high school where I kind of took somebody's boyfriend, and and it wasn't like like, I don't know, necessarily malicious. I wasn't thinking about the girl at all. And I used to judge myself a lot for that. And I'd be like, and I would judge her, and I'll be like, oh, well, like, he didn't really like her anyway, and she was crazy. And I would also, like, after the couple years after that happened, like, looking back, I never really could fully admit the role that I played in it. I was like, no, he was just the one who was an asshole and playing, his girl. But I had a role to play in that. And I wasn't able to look at that until I was able to accept that it was okay. Like, that wasn't objectively wrong for me to do. Yeah, it wasn't the most compassionate choice of me to make. And it was definitely coming from some sort of need, or, wanting validation for sure. And so I don't have to judge myself for it. I can look at myself and be like, okay, well, like, where was that really coming from? It wasn't about the decision itself. The true value in like reflecting back on your past is like, well, how does that inform my present? Like, what do I understand now that I didn't know then? And like, you can sort of make peace with that, and it can allow you to grow and change. Like, if I couldn't accept that I did something that wasn't considerate in the past, then I might still be doing that today, because I would still have that cognitive dissonance, right? Where I can maintain the idea of myself as a good person while still like acting in ways that aren't actually embodying that. Like, it makes it hard to learn lessons when you're judging yourself. But it's cool also, like, from my perspective now, I'm grateful that happened. I'm not, I really don't regret any single thing that I've done, because my shit is my shit, and all of my insights come from my shit. All of my peace comes from making peace with my shit. And it's mine. Like, it's just that experience of navigating like our inner judgment, and I don't know, the things that we attach to, that's deeply personal. Like, nobody else can fully understand that. And I think it's beautiful that we can torture ourselves, but then we can also set ourselves free. And that process actually, I think that that deepens my love for myself. Like, every single time I am like judging myself super harshly, or like digging myself into a hole, and then I realize it, and then I'm able to like climb out and continue forward, I'm like, that is building my love and my faith in myself, because I know that like no realization or no circumstance is too big for me to handle it. And I'm continuing to grow in ways that, like, if I was trying to control it, I couldn't do it as perfectly as it's already happening. And so I love that. I love that it's all like big and mysterious, but you can hold your own hand the whole way and be like, yeah, none of this is good or bad. You can be the parent to yourself and like watch yourself throw a tantrum, but then be like, okay, well, what can we do next? And that relationship with yourself is always going to be there. And I think that's something that can be appreciated rather than, feel like a prison. Because I don't know. I used to like wish I was somebody else or had different life circumstances or different personality traits, but now I wouldn't have it any other way. I being Jackie is pretty okay. I'm not mad at it.
It looks pretty awesome from my perspective. I love it. I love hanging out with you. And I resonated with what you were saying before about, if you had, judged yourself for your contribution to that scenario, of quote unquote taking someone's boyfriend, you wouldn't if you were really trying to hold on to just being a nice person or a good person, you wouldn't have seen that, yeah, like you contributed to that, and because you accepted that you were in a mindset that wanted to contribute. So I guess the way that I think of it is like, I when I was like 16, I tried to sleep with one of my dear friend's boyfriends. And it, like, I got so drunk and I barely remember it, but I remember pieces of it. And the next day I was like, oh my God, I am so sorry. But the fact that I had tried to sleep with her boyfriend had nothing to do with her, had nothing to do with him. It had everything to do with me. And they were just ways that I was trying to prove something to myself. She is beautiful. And he's a cutie pie, or he was a cutie pie. And you know hadn't had a boyfriend ever, at that point. And I had been watching my friends date for like 5 years up to that point. So like at like 10, 11, I'm watching my friends starting to date, and by the time I meet this new friend, um at a new high school that I started, it was about 5 years into me just watching my friends dating and me not getting, like, not allowing myself to trust myself to get involved, because I thought it was like a trap. I was just watching my friends get their heart broken, and I'm like, no, men are just good for nothing. It's trouble. They can offer you nothing. He's 12. He's broke. He can't do shit for you. And I was super judgmental, but it wasn't that boys, couldn't be trusted, which, side note, maybe they can't, because when they're young, and they think for 12-year-old girls, like, none of those kids could be trusted, because they're running off of a lot of assumptions, and they're trying to prove that they're valuable, that they're worth something, that they're good enough. And so a lot of the things that they do is that it's that mindset fueled with all the, fueled by all their hormones and all their changing experiences of puberty and their body, and all of those feelings that they've never felt before hitting them like a ton of bricks. And then paired with the mindset of I'm not good enough, you do crazy things to try to fulfill that need, to prove that you are good enough. So, when you were telling me about, stealing that other girl's boyfriend, it's like, I don't think it even had anything to do with him or her. I think it was just a part of you trying to, your teenage brain is trying to prove that it's good enough. And a way that it could prove that it's good enough is that I'm so good that I could take someone else from someone. I don't think it had anything to do with either of them, in the same way that I don't think that me trying to sleep with a friend's boyfriend of the time had anything to do with them, and had everything with me trying to prove that I was good enough for me, and that's how I was proving that to myself. But because I was horrified by my actions, fueled by that need, I have never found myself in a situation like that again, because I was able to admit that I was super needy, that I was super insecure, and that I was super desperate. And those three things together, no, it's like, no wonder, there's no surprise that I wanted to sleep with a friend's boyfriend, that I was willing to put a friendship at jeopardy because I was just trying to prove that I was good enough. And so because I could admit that, like, we have dealt a lot more with being enough, boyfriend or not, partner or not, friend or not, I'm enough, that my life is full of me, and that's enough. And so I don't need to sleep with someone or take someone, because I'm not trying to prove that I'm good enough to me. as much as I used to when I was a teenager, which is, understandable time for us to all do similar things like that.
Yeah, we've all been there. We all like feel this sense of lack. It's just pervasive because even, there are a lot, I feel a lot more full in general, and my experience sometimes feels so full. And then there's other times where I feel empty. I feel like there's something missing. It's just like this habitual feeling of needing to get somewhere, needing to achieve something, like always just placing that feeling of contentment behind this wall of something that I need to do. But all of that is just, I don't know, like we just habitually do this. I think because we perceive ourselves as separate, and that perception can be so convincing sometimes. Because even though now I recognize it for what it is, sometimes, like, I still sometimes get caught up in the perception of division. And that's when those feelings of lack come up. But yeah, like you said, when you recognize, when you look back at your past or even things that you do now and you recognize where it's actually coming from, like, you're not an evil or bad person. Like, that is coming from that sense of lack. It's coming from the insecurity that we create by attaching to ideas about who we should be, and really perceiving ourselves as actually separate, and that we're in competition with other people, and that's just not the case. And so I have empathy for that version of myself that feels separate, that experiences jealousy and anger and insecurity, all of that. Like, I have empathy for that part of myself, and so I can take more accountability for the actions that don't align with the idea of myself, or the idea of myself that I've hung on to for a long ass time, of being like a good, kind, sweet person, a good friend, like a girl's girl, even. Like, all of that stuff, all of your identity as a good person gets in the way of you actually being a good person, because it's like a fog that keeps you from being able to see what you're really doing and how you're actually affecting people. And once you kind of loosen your grip on that identity, or the perception of division, of being just this thing in a world that's completely separate from us, like, once you start to take that a little bit less seriously, you can have more clarity about how you're actually being, and then you can actually grow a lot quicker because you're not judging yourself at every step of the way. You're like, okay, well, I've always been enough, even though I haven't recognized it. And I can be enough and learn lessons at the same time. Like, they're not mutually exclusive. Like, to be enough, you don't have to be perfect all the time. God, and that's definitely a habitual thought for me, of like wanting to never make a mistake, because then that shows that I'm unworthy in some way. And then that actually keeps me from learning the lessons that would actually get me further in the long run, like would actually improve my situation. Or like, sometimes I can resist growth by clinging on to self-judgment, because at least that's certain, right? Like, it's a false sense of certainty, but it feels like, okay, I don't know what traveling into that unknown territory is, but I know, like, I have this idea about who I am because of the situation that just transpired. And that to me feels certain. And this judgment feels familiar. And so it feels safe, rather than like allowing yourself to be like, to own up to your shit. Be like, yeah, that was not cool of me to do. And still just move on with your life. Like, we could do that. Wow, isn't that crazy? You don't have to judge yourself into stagnation. You can sort of keep going. And there was one other point that I had. I completely forgot. So maybe if you say something, I will remember it.
It'll come back in 4 weeks. No, I was kidding. But I love that, judging yourselves into being and judging ourselves to the point where we can't grow. It's like, no, I don't want to be a good person, and I don't worry about being a bad person. I enjoy being a whole person, a complete person who has traits that I judge as being good and who has traits that I judge as being bad, but they're all there. It's all included. And so it's like, no, I'm just a person, and a person with fluctuating emotions and old habits and new dreams and old, connections and old associations and new opportunities and new growth and new potential. Like, it's all there. So it's like I'm a person, and even that's debatable. that's that's definitely debatable, because I don't feel as separate from my environment all the time in the way that I used to, because there are definitely moments where I absolutely feel divided, and I definitely feel like a character on the stage. But more often lately, I've been feeling like the stage, like the curtains, like the green screen behind me, like the lights. Like it feels like I am the environment, and I love looking at my apartment in particular, because my apartment is like the greatest, like is like such a great mirror of like where my mind is and where my priorities are, because it's my immediate environment. So I love looking at my environment as it's changing, and looking at that mirror. And there are so many mirrors, and I love that this analogy came back to us, because we were using the analogy of mirrors before, and how relationships are like mirrors, how your environment is like a mirror, how your emotions are like a mirror, your thoughts are another mirror. It's like we have so many mirrors reflecting back to us, and sometimes those reflections can look scary, but they're not always, it's not always what we think, because it's just us. So how scary can I be to me? Like, it just feels like even the scariest reflection is just something that I don't want to admit is me, something that I don't want to embrace as being a part of my experience, a part of my self, because I don't want it to be part of my identity. And lucky for me, it doesn't actually have to be a part of my identity to still be a reflection of my life, of my experience.
Yeah, like we're trying to just figure out who we are. And so every single reflection that we get back, we, before we recognize that there's no end to what we could think about ourselves, like we will attach to it. And that's part of our ego development that we go through, right? As kids, like at first, like we're born, we don't know what the fuck is going on. We need a little bit of a crumb of an idea of certainty just to like continue on. But at a certain point later in the stages of the ego development, you kind of see that for what it is. And that's how you reach like maturity, I guess. Like I'm forgetting the exact steps, but it's like most of our society is stuck at a certain level of ego development, of just like egotism and competition uh and just kind of accepting the illusion as reality. But yeah, like you said, Amanda, like all of these reflections are just possible perceptions that you could have about the reality of you, which is something that is big and mysterious. Like you said, we can't even be certain that we're human. So why do we think we could be certain about the specific type of human that we are, and that everybody else would probably perceive us the same way? Like you can't settle on an idea, because you aren't just this limited thing. And so no matter what perceptions you get reflected back, like it's not that you should just write them off right away, or like say like, oh, like that's not a reflection of me, because maybe there are considerations that are being reflected back at you that you could, take in. And that's just the natural way that we grow. We're making a mistake, like seeing it for what it is and then adjusting course. And judgment is not required for that process to happen. Like you just be like, oh, that's interesting. Okay. But it's not like, oh, because I had a negative perception of me, automatically I'm a bad fucking person and I'm worthless and whatever. Like our mind can go to that place so quick. And it's just one perception out of infinite that could exist literally for any scenario. Like one behavior that you do, like let's say you roll your eyes at somebody. Like that could be perceived a million different ways. And also the outcome of that could be perceived a million different ways, and it could go off in a million different directions. It's way too complex to be able to settle on the fucking binary of good and bad. It's all just this supremely complex dance that's happening. But I also think about, because you were saying like you blend into your environment more, you have the experience of, being part of the scenery. And that's definitely relatable. Yesterday I was going on a walk and I was like, I kind of like freaked out for a second because I was like, I don't know how my legs work. And I'm like, I'm in a body. I'm in a body and it's walking and I have a skeleton. How is this happening? How is it working? I don't know. Like, that is just the clearest indication that we don't know fucking shit, is that I don't even know how I work. So why would I try and convince myself that I have any sort of control? I just don't. And like things are just too complex to settle on any sort of certainty. And what's left when you're not trying to do that is just your experience. And I like how you said my experience is full of me, because that's so true, because you're not experiencing anything other than your perception, like the mental construction of the sense information that you're getting, right? Like it's like there's a movie screen in your brain that's like projecting your best guess of what you think is happening. And you're alone in that. But yeah, every experience is just as full because your perception is just as intense. Like no matter what situation you're in, like your experience of being you kind of stays the same, and that can feel a bunch of different ways, literally infinite amount of ways. Um, but all of them are just as full. It's not like there's like a lack of experience, or like there's not a variation really in the intensity of just our immediate cognitive experience. Like is that translating?
Oh
Like
yeah.
it's still like my sense of being me in whatever situation I'm in stays the same.
Hmm. Yeah, like the it's like if a rose by any other name is still a rose, right? And that's not to say that it still is called a rose, it's just that it's still existing as a rose regardless of what you call it. And I was thinking about that too, like when you think of like tribes of humans that are still existing on earth now that are not really participating in our modern world, and these off-grid societies, it's like I don't even know if they know that we call them humans. I don't even know if they know that we call them, you know whatever, like, and that doesn't mean that that because they don't know that word, that all of a sudden they're not, Like we can't consider them a human unless they agree to be called a human. It's like, no, you can still call them that, but they don't care. And they don't feel like less of a quote unquote person or less of a human because we don't use that name to describe, or they don't use that name to describe themselves, right? They're still their whole existence. And so even when you label something, that doesn't mean anything about what you labeled. That's just something that you decided, and that's something that you're moving forward with, is that this situation is good, this person is bad, this person is a person. It's like, you can label it however you like, but just know that the label is not the only thing there. And the label doesn't offer you any control, it doesn't offer you any certainty. It's just something that we're doing. And yet it's so often that we take what we're doing and we make it into this serious thing that you have to like make a sacrifice to. You have to worship at the altar of this thing that we're doing, because now it's our super serious thing. Now there are specific rituals around doing this thing. Now you have to do it at a certain time of the day, or a certain wardrobe, or you have to have berries, braided into your hair with flowers, like we make things so serious, and then we wonder why we feel so stuck. And I think that's so hilarious that we put in all these rules. It's like, no, you can only take a left step at 3 o'clock in the day. Other than that, you have to start with the right foot always. And it's like, oh, I don't feel like stepping anymore. Now I feel so like cautious. Now I feel worried if I take a step on with the right foot first. And so it definitely was resonating just how often we just put ourselves into this box, and then we wonder why we think in box form. We don't think outside the box, but we don't realize, of course not, you're living inside this box that you created, and you don't have to. But it's so convincing, just like feeling separate is so convincing, because I'm not entirely sure that I'm not my relationships with reality, or that I'm not my environment, or that I'm not my relationship with other people. Like I feel so weird right now when it comes to, like, when I think about other people, because you know family members that I thought I was going to be really close to for a long time, we're not that close right now. And yet I'm having the most fun, and I feel the freest and the lightest I've ever felt hanging out with you and with Andrew and with Ray and everybody on the Patreon calls and everyone in the Discord and everyone at the retreats. And I'm having the time of my life. And yet I'm not talking to my family. And that's not because anybody's doing anything wrong. That's just what is. Like, what is right now is that I don't talk to them as frequently as I used to. And I don't visit them as frequently as I used to when I was living with boyfriends of 20 minutes away from them. And it's just it's not what I thought, but that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong. It's just that the relationships in my life don't look the way that I thought that they would have, based on my old expectations, based on my old perceptions. And yet, even though it looks nothing like the ideal life that I told myself I wanted and I was working so hard towards, I'm having the time of my life. Like, it makes no sense on a logical level. It's like, okay, so this is not the dream life that we meticulously planned. And we're not really talking to the people that we thought we would talk to all the time. And we don't have any of the things that we told ourselves we would have had by this age, according to the plan. And yet we're happy. I don't believe it. It's all, like, a part of me's like, I don't know. Something's not right. It's not, and yet I feel great not living according to my own life plan. Right. And so that's why it's like, I don't know, but I feel so much freer and so much lighter because I'm not holding on to what should be. And I'm just appreciating what is, even if it's not pleasant, even if it's not what I would have thought was my ideal dream life. It still feels like I am living my dream life, just not the dream that I thought was the only dream.
Yeah. Well said, Amanda. And yeah, I think for me in my life, in terms of attaching to expectations or outcomes, I'm still very much guilty. And this is something that I think I'm getting better at catching myself doing it, because it used to always happen really sneakily, right? I'd be like looking forward to something and, that feels good. And I'm like, oh, nothing wrong with like having goals and working towards your goals and, being super productive. But there's that's a double-edged sword. And on the other end of it is like attachment to a specific outcome. And then when that's not the case, like just feeling overall this sense of dissatisfaction that I don't know, I can't necessarily even pin it to one specific thing ever. It's just like, I think the dissatisfaction, I don't know, like it used to be sneaky like that, but now it's like I notice it more so in the moment. And when I'm feeling like, oh, fuck, like, for example, one thing that I'm currently reckoning with is like, I just recently finished my yoga teacher training, right? And I like thought by this time, which is like 2 months after I finished my training, that I would be at a studio working and like I would be, pushing the issue a little bit more. Like that's the plan that I had in my mind that like, oh yeah, once I finish the training, I'm hitting the ground running. I'm starting to teach right away. And I had that created a lot of pressure as well, though. It was something I was like looking forward to, but also it was still like I was fixated on the idea of it. And then I created all this pressure in my mind that like once the time came around to actually start applying to studios and all that, I'm like, I've avoided it. And I avoided it is because I made it into such a big deal in my mind. And I'm like, I know I'm attaching to this as being like something that will make me feel satisfied and, whole. And that's a lot of pressure to put on something. And I'm like, well, fuck, like I don't know where to start. I don't want to get it wrong. Like, and so I'll just avoid. And I've sort of noticed myself doing this now. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, obviously, if you're feeling dissatisfied, you were attached to like this happening in a specific amount of time. You're attached to like the identity of like being a yoga teacher or being somebody who's productive or somebody that's, you know, like a go-getter. Like you're attached to that idea. And like when I recognize that that's where the feeling of discontentment is coming from, I'm allowing myself just to practice acceptance and be like, okay, but this is where we're at. And that's okay too. And then once I do that, it's easier to actually take steps towards the goal. But um I think when you create so much pressure on one outcome, it can almost like keep you from acting because the idea is safe in my head while as long as it's still an idea. But like once it's actually time for execution, that's when things could go wrong or in a way that I didn't expect. And I have resistance to that. So I can just avoid things. And that's a tendency I've noticed about myself because I'm so attached to my end goals that I'm terrified of failing. And so it's safer just to not start. And that's something we're working through every day, step by step. But to me, the goal isn't like accepting where I'm at so that I can achieve my goals. It's just being okay with not living up to my own high ass expectations. Like, that's okay. It's almost, I feel like it's good for me to like allow myself to lean into this side of maybe just being lenient with myself. And because I've not allowed myself to do that for most of my life. I've been extremely hard on myself, like in every sort of aspect. So there's something to learn from the opposite end of the spectrum and being okay with not being an overachiever for a little bit. Like that's kind of, I can appreciate this time for what it is, right? Even though at the same time, I'm feeling that discontentment. It's so weird. Like the way I feel emotions and things is very meta at this point. Like there's like the immediate reaction and the feeling, and then there's not like the higher self, but like it's like the zoomed out perspective. And I think both are important and there should be a balance of both. Um, but yeah, just zooming out a little bit, knowing that no specific situation is going to be the one. So like even if your life isn't where you want it to be, you can just be okay with that too. Like that doesn't need to influence the way that you feel as much as it does for me right now. And maybe that changes as you get older, right? You learn that things just aren't going to go the way you planned. And so maybe you stop attaching to it as much. And I don't think, I mean, that's how it'll go if you're willing to see that for what it is rather than continuing to hang on to attachment no matter how many times it smacks you down. But yeah, that's just what I'm dealing with right now. And even though it feels tumultuous and like I'd rather things go a little bit more smoothly, it's also like I know that this is important work I'm doing too, of just detoxing from the addiction to like satisfying my ego and sort of starving my ego for a little bit and be like, okay, well, can you still feel okay even if you're not boosting yourself up or doing all the things that you feel like you should be doing? Like, can you still feel okay? And I think I'm getting better at that because, that next thing is never going to be the thing. And as many of my goals that I have already achieved, which is a lot, like I'm proud of the shit that I've done so far, none of them have actually satisfied me. There's always a next thing. So it's about being okay, like no matter what part of that process you're in.
Oh my goodness, absolutely. I definitely have seen so much growth, Jackie, especially from the first time that you jumped into like a Patreon call and jumping on Discord to after the Vermont retreat. The retreats definitely give you such a fertile ground for growth, and it's not that the retreat is the fertile ground, is that you show up as that fertile ground and then you just give yourself space to grow. You literally paid for space to grow with other people who are doing the same thing. And so that is incredible. I don't necessarily think we get better at that because we get older, but we definitely have more opportunities as we get older to develop that skill, because there are so many adults that I know that are fucking terrified to live, petrified. They don't take really any chances. They make the same safe choices, and then they wonder why they don't have any pizzazz for their own life, or they have no passion, no enthusiasm, no excitement for their life. And it's because they're so afraid to fail that they don't allow themselves to try. But I love the acronym that someone had shared. I forget, it was years ago. They turned the word fail, and F stood for frequent, A was attempts, I in, and L was learning. Frequent attempts in learning. And it's like, have you failed today? Have you gave another attempt in learning? I hope you did. Fail often, fail every day, fail multiple times an hour. Attempt, like go for it. Why not? It is in all those attempts that you refine yourself, that you smooth out those rough edges in all those attempts. And if you can make those attempts with lightness and less attachment and less of that heavy burden of success, I must make this happen, I must work, I must be productive. It's like, screw that, man. Enjoy the process. You are the process. And so I love that someone revamped the word fail to be frequent attempts in learning. And that made me feel like, have I failed lately? I feel like I want to fail a little more often. I want to put in a few more attempts in my process of learning how to live, how to be my life, how to let go, how to let go of letting go, how to be okay with the things that I do hold on to, and to not judge myself when I notice I am holding on. Because this is an ongoing process, and there's never a quote unquote wrong choice, because even if you have a wrong choice that you made, it still leads you to the realization, to learning that that was a wrong choice, quote unquote. And so just learning what a wrong choice means to you is a win in my book, but I do agree that so many people, and I feel this way too, there are so many things that I've never tried because I didn't want to fail. And I was so afraid of failing because I thought that that would mean something about me, that failing meant I was a failure. And, the times that I actually felt like a failure are the times where like I didn't even want to, like I didn't want to live my life. I didn't want to enjoy being here amidst my sea of failures and mistakes, if that's how I was feeling at that moment. and and that was, heartbreaking, that I didn't want to just be my life, that I didn't think that I was enough to be my own life, and the moments that I have quote unquote failed have led to some amazing conversations and some amazing opportunities that I never would have seen coming, that never would have come, you know, if I wasn't moping at that friend's house, and then they're a family member or a friend happened to be over and they're hearing me crying and moping about not getting what I want, and they're like, well, have you thought about this or that? And I know, and I'm like, no, I didn't, and maybe my life isn't over. Maybe this failure isn't the end of me. And so those conversations reignited my enthusiasm. I was like, oh my God, yes, I can keep going. That's right. I didn't die. I'm here. I can keep going. I can do something amidst all these pieces. I can glue them together and voila, we've created a new sculpture. So it's just, I definitely feel that as we get older, you can practice this more often, but just because people get older doesn't mean that they actually are practicing it. Because if I'm looking at the reflection of our system back to me, it's that there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of not trying to do something different because there's an assumption that the failure is more likely to happen, and seeing failure as a dead end instead of a fork in the road. So that's kind of how I view failures now, is that a failure is not reaching a dead end in a maze. Failures are reaching a fork in the road and an opportunity to go in a new direction.
That's a great way to put that. Yeah, it's not like if you don't do something perfectly the first time that you can't try again. It's funny, like that's so obvious. And yet sometimes I'll be like, well, and it's not even that I'm consciously thinking this, but it's that like I think things need to be perfect the first time I do them, and if they're not, then it was never going to work anyway. Like that's no. That's not the case at all. There's always there's always another choice. There's a new way to pivot, and I like to imagine like a stream running down a mountain, and for example, the stream gets it right the first time, whatever. It would just go straight down the mountain in a perfect way. But the water would be flowing really quickly, right? And maybe it couldn't support any sort of life in the rivers because it would be moving too quickly, whatever. Versus a river that, is moving down the mountain and then maybe it hits a rock and then it goes in this direction. And there are points where the water is pulled up versus parts where it's flowing a little bit more easy. And so it's like a unique winding way that it gets down, and sort of the parts where it gets stuck are the reason why it can support life. Like those little pools where, fish can lay their eggs and different things like that. And you can see that as like being beautiful and necessary when it's in nature. But like when you look at a human life, no, even when you look at a human life, you see like in everybody else, you see how their setbacks make them stronger or make them unique or give them an edge, right? Make them beautiful in some way. We can see that so clearly in other people, but like we, at least I, have this assumption of myself that other people want me to be perfect. Nobody fucking expects that. Like even something as simple as like having somebody come over and being worried that your room is a mess. Like nobody else really gives a fuck at all. But like I just make the assumption that if I'm not perfect, then I'm going to be judged. And then somehow and that it's just because I'm settling on the assumption that anybody's idea of me or my own perception of myself actually means something about me. And it doesn't. But that's how we keep ourselves stagnant, is holding on to that idea as being something that's real and something that can be determined. Because otherwise, like, if you were alone on the planet, you wouldn't think about what failure means about you. Like, you would just be learning in the way that humans naturally do, which is through trial and error. And you wouldn't have any sort of perception about what that means about you because you wouldn't even think about that. You would just be you and you would just do what you needed to keep surviving. So, yeah, like we make everything so much heavier for ourselves. It really doesn't have to be. Even if you do nothing, which you can't really do nothing, even if doing nothing is doing something, right? Like you can't avoid having to make choices and steer your life. But even if you just make the safe choices your whole life, like that could still be just as full of a life. It's not that one is better or worse, but it's like, how do you want to live? And deep down inside, I know I want to have a life where I'm like fearless and push myself out of my comfort zone constantly because I know that like I'm not getting this life back, right? And it's meant to be lived. Like that's the whole reason we're here is just to fucking experience. And I want that for myself. The reality of me wants that. It wants to be free and it wants to express. And it's the idea of myself that's clogging everything up and making things heavy and complicated. Um, but that idea of yourself is always going to pop back in. And it's just about, I don't know, paying more attention and maybe getting better at noticing when it's influencing you and making the decision not to let it get in your way because you know that no matter how uncomfortable you are doing something new, you can still do it. Like you can still, you know, walk yourself into that situation you're so afraid of. Like I'm imagining, being my own parent again. I like walking your scared crying ass kid to the first day of kindergarten. Like they didn't want to go. They didn't think they could do it. But then like once you can get yourself into that situation, you realize that you're capable of so much more than you think. And doubting yourself is really the only thing standing in your way.
Oh yeah, and I love that you brought up trial and error because where's the error? I think someone's assuming here. It feels like try and pivot. You try, your assumption implodes within itself, and you pivot.
It's like trial and context.
Right, exactly. Because I'm like, it's not an error unless you assumed something is right. It's like trial and experimentation, trial and context, trial and pivot. Like it's not an error unless you decide it to be, unless we're talking about like a math, and then there is trial and a quote unquote mathematical error according to like the framework and standards that we've come up with. But for everything else that's not so black and white of a subject, it is trial and context, trial and pivot, learn and pivot. And so I love that, and being able to embody that and then showing people and share our quote unquote mistakes on these episodes and on our live shows, because we're showing people and showing ourselves that our mistakes mean nothing other than what we say that they mean. And that there's a lot of opportunity in those failures, and that the failures are like a winding river down a mountain. You know, the failure is just leading into another direction, and you get another opportunity to find out what that direction has in store, and then you encounter other failures, and then the river winds in all these new directions, and then you have this unique body of water, and it's changing with the mountain's changing, and the people and the animals that are around it are all changing. Like, it's everything's always in a constant state of change. And so it seems so silly to like judge ourselves about things not being black and white because we said that they should be. And it's just shades of gray. And that's why, it's such a good laugh. And that's why I love sharing stories where, like, I'm crying because I didn't get a soup that I ordered on DoorDash, and it just reminded me of, just how much I wasn't trying to feel those feelings of having a hard day yesterday and ordering soup to comfort myself, and then that soup not arriving, and then crying because I opened the bag and the soup's not there, and then laughing a few minutes later because it was like I laughed after I gave myself space to just feel like this is a crummy day and I really am not loving it and it's not pleasant, and I did make the most of it, and I am just moving forward, and I'm gonna keep going. But it felt really good, so I'm so glad that I didn't get that thing that I was really hoping for, because it allowed me to admit that I wasn't feeling on top of the world, that I felt like a failure, that I felt like a series of just curveballs. So it was really a good thing that it didn't happen, but it didn't feel that way at the moment, um because I was definitely pushing away those quote unquote negative feelings. I was like, I have things to do, I have to work, I have things, like, I can't afford to just crumble right now. And then when I did crumble, I was like, I'm really glad that we crumbled, and it was all because we didn't get the soup. So I was like, like, it was such a good thing, because if I had gotten the soup, I would have felt better, and I could have delayed being space for those feelings about having a hard day. I could have just did what I always do, which is just not push them down, but just push them to the side. Like, okay, we'll just deal with that later. Later showed up right now and said, not later, now. And I was like, so I love it. I love that we share all of these things, because it's very easy to get caught up in imperfection and not making mistakes and not making failures. And that's just not what we have before us. That's not what we have within us. It's not so black and white, and we really wouldn't want it to be, because then there would be no spontaneity, there'd be no surprises, there'd be nothing to learn, because everything would just be the way that it should. And how awful would that be?
Yeah, that's like why I was always afraid of going to heaven. I think I mentioned this before, but like everything being good spanned out for eternity does not sound very good, right? And so we can embrace the fluctuations in our experience, right? The creation and destruction. And I was sort of getting the image of like building sandcastles. And I think everything that we do in this life is like building a sandcastle, because none of it's going to last, right? Everything is fleeting, and you might put a lot of detail and attention into that sandcastle, and you can convince yourself that, like, you can tell yourself, oh yeah, this is going to stay here forever, like nothing, like if this sandcastle goes away, like I don't know what I'll do with myself. And then when it inevitably does, you're hurt, you're crushed. And then you're like, I never want to build a sandcastle again, because they're going to be lost, right? And that's when we can stagnate ourselves and not want to participate in the environment anymore. And then, yeah, it keeps us from experiencing the joy of building a sandcastle and rebuilding it. And you get better at building them, the more you do it, but they're always going to get washed away. And you can accept that. And then when that inevitably does happen, you don't have to see it as like the end of the world. You just be like, oh, okay, well, now what can my next sandcastle look like, right? And that's, I guess, how we can negotiate like participating and creating things in the world without expecting them to last forever, because none of this will. So at any step of the process, you can just have an acceptance of what's going on, your emotions about it, but knowing that that's not going to last forever on either end of the spectrum. And then you can make a lot more peace with the fluctuations while maintaining just like an inner peace. That's all we're looking for, right? And inner peace is just having a baseline acceptance for what reality is and who you are without knowing exactly what that is. And that's it. So I think this about wraps up our episode today. It's been a really, really fun chat talking about you know, disappointment, failure, and the cycles that we go through of attachment and then loss, and how we can make that process, a little more bearable and a little bit more efficient just by letting go a little bit, letting go of what we want or what we think we should happen, and just going with the flow.
Oh my goodness, absolutely, Jackie. It has been wonderful. I'm so glad that we dived into disappointments and the opportunities that are found in those moments. So thank you everybody for joining, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.